what we're going to do in working on the frontal bone is give you a brand new concept, which is that often we talk about this misalignment or this scoliosis in the head that people have, where you have a torsion or you have a side bending. Of course, there are other things. There's an inferior vertical strain, superior vertical strain. We're going to talk about just the torsion and the side bending. And the problem is people start with the sphenoid bone. The sphenoid is a wonderful bone. It's a beautiful bone, but it also moves in very weird ways like this. And as you can see here, the sphenoid bone bumps up against all the other bones in the skull in the front of the face and head. So it bumps up against the frontal, it bumps up against the zygoma, the temporal bone. All these bones and more can restrict it. So rather than trying to fight with this bone that's being surrounded, we're going to actually first give it some room by working on the frontal bone, which is this big, massive, hard bone. And proof of how stiff this is the front of the skull and the back of the skull are notorious for being the places it's okay to put trauma into. If you get hit in the front of the head and the back of the head, you're probably going to live. If you get hit here in the squamous portion of the temporal bone, that could be all she wrote, because all these areas are so thin. So the front and the back are very stiff and have to be treated like they're very stiff joints. So what we're going to show you now is how to treat the frontal bone, which is kind of like the backstop of the cranium because it's so big and heavy and thick, and because it will reduce the motion of all the other bones. So we want to free that up so the cranium can move. So first we're going to look at what is the static or symmetrical or asymmetrical situation. What's the symmetry? Well, if I take my thumbs and put them on the side of the frontal bone and drop down into a divot, that's the sphenoid bone. And you can see I drop down much further on the right than the left. That means that this divot, which is the temple, is actually the sphenoid. So you can see that my thumb is higher on the left than on the right. So Elizabeth has a left torsion. If I try to work with that, it's going to be almost impossible. So I'm going to work with the frontal bone. So because the frontal bone is like this, I'm going to have resistance on this side. And if I test, Elizabeth, you can feel that this feels pretty soft, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this, even though I've worked on your skull before, you feel how it feels stiffer?
Yeah, it feels very stiff.
Just like if you had a scoliosis, it would be stiffer on that convexity. So all we do is we gently play ping pong. I push it from right to left, and then push it from left to right. And gently push it from right to left. And we know when we're done, because instead of feeling like it's like this, it begins to feel like it's just floating. And once it feels like it's floating, you've done your job. Later we'll talk about fine-tuning it, but the main thing is that when there's been trauma to the skull, and you've had some trauma, right?
A lot of trauma.
The skull can become extremely hard, and you have to do this kind of work first before you do the very light craniosacral work. So we're just going to do it back and forth. I'm pushing back and forth like I'm playing ping pong with myself until I feel it float. And once it floats, then we know it is in neutral. That's what you do.